Well, we are back again at Graham Way Cycles for a little bit more of his collection. By popular demand, we are here to see his Colnago collection. But before we kick off and actually have a look at his wonderful collection, just a quick question to Graham. Have you ever met Ernesto?
Yes, I did actually. I think on a couple of occasions. When I went to the Milan show in I think 82 and 84, and I was trying to get the agency for Colnago. You would deal with obviously a salesman who greeted you when you went onto the stand, and at some point Ernesto would be wheeled in, meet Mr. Colnago, and you got to shake hands with him and a photograph. And there were photographs done, but God knows what happened to them. I certainly haven't got them. And yeah, but we never were successful in actually getting the agency. It required a lot of investment, which at the time I wasn't able to do. But I appreciated the bikes and wanted to import them, but could never afford it because it was a rich man's game.
Right.
You know, the Italian bikes in the UK were, I mean, it started in the 70s, I guess. Although even before that, in the 60s, when I first started riding my bike, one of the guys in our club, Deeside Olympic, had a Legnano.
Right.
Classic Legnano, which he'd waited a year for.
I think you've actually got. Did you?
Right, I've got one. Yeah. And they always had this sort of limey green colour.
Right.
Yeah, it's just a frame. It's because I've never had the equipment of the right time to go on that bike. I have actually got a bike with the right equipment, but it's a Holdsworth.
Right.
And and it's complete, and I wouldn't want to break that up. But and then after that, Sinelli was a big name, and again there were guys in the team in the club who had Sinelli bikes, and they were so heavy. They were really heavy. That was a feature of the bikes.
Looked absolutely amazing.
They looked amazing.
Heavy, right?
Yeah. And of course you have to remember that in the 70s, every town virtually had its own frame builder.
Right.
Certainly bike shops. There were bike shops everywhere, and there were dozens and dozens of frame builders. I mean, you discuss frame builders in Liverpool, and people immediately think of Harry Quinn, but there were many other frame builders. Fothergill, Sowens, Walvale. You know, those ones quickly come to mind. If I could spend a bit more time, I think of a few more. And that was just in Liverpool. Manchester was the same. And then of course there were the bigger builders who made frames for the big shops. Like Harry Hall didn't build frames; they were made by somebody. I never built frames.
Yes.
Ribble never built frames.
Right.
And that was the same everywhere. Mercium were big builders. Terry Dolan obviously built a lot of frames for me.
Right.
But the evolution of the Italian frames came about, or Italian bikes, mostly because of Italian emigres. There was in Bristol Maria Edwards, who was the mother of Phil Edwards, who was a professional, rode with Francesco Moser.
Okay.
Wow. And in London there was Italo, his name was. I can't remember his second name, and his business was called Saba, S-A-B-A. They imported Viner, and they also imported frames which had their own brand on, Saba.
Right.
And one of the top riders of the time, Ian Hallam, he rode on those Saba bikes for many years. So that was the start of it. And then I remember a guy came to call on us, and his name was Bill Dormer, and he had a great big blue van, Tiger Sport. Okay. And he was from Essex Way or something like that, and he was picking up frames in Italy and Belgium and bringing them over and selling them. Right. Right. He had the Choc or Chioc.
Yeah, you realised that there was an actual demand there.
Yeah,
he had a van and
they were beautiful frames.
Right.
I mean, I rode one in '79.
Now, I was actually going to say, I was going to ask you, what was your first? Can you remember your first Colnago?
Yeah, the first one was a Mexico.
A Mexico, right, okay.
Yeah, it was a Mexico. I never had a Colnago Super. We certainly had a few in.
You've got a few now.
Yeah, yeah. But by the time I started, I was fortunate enough to find the distributor in Belgium when I discussed this in the last video of how I used to go to Belgium. I came across the distributor in Belgium, which was a company called Kodacheks. They had Colnagos, and I could buy one, or two, or three. Right. And they were expensive then. Yeah. I mean, I can remember I actually went over in my car, and I was coming back with a gold Colnago Profile, or Mexico, one of the, I'm not sure which was for Mark Bell to ride in the Olympics in 1980, whenever they were in Los Angeles. Was it 82?
I
82.
no idea. I was born in 74, so I'd probably... Yeah.
84, sorry, 1984. Yeah, I had a gold one, and when I went through the customs, it was in, I had a Porsche at the time,
right.
No, not Timeback, but it was under the bonnet, it was in the bonnet.
Right,
in the front.
got you, like
the frame
a 911, yeah, okay.
And when we went through customs, he opened it up and he saw the frame there, and he said, right, what's going on here? And I told him, I said, it's for Mark Bell to ride in the Olympics. Oh, go on, okay.
Really?
And,
Wow.
yeah, I remember that. And that was from Kodacek's.
Right.
And it was gold.
Yes.
And I'd asked them, could they do something, and they did a gold metallic colour, you know. Or, I mean, because I think they may have been able to paint frames in Belgium. They'd get the frames raw and paint them. I'm not absolutely sure, but certainly that was around that time, 83, 84, when we were starting to buy more Colnagos from Kodacek's. And I rode one. I wasn't really racing actively then, but I had a bike which I rode around on, that kind of thing. But that was the start of it, yeah.
Roughly how many have you got then, would you say?
About 20.
About 20 bikes, okay.
Yeah.
They're absolutely stunning. We are going to go through them in a minute. We've brought in though friend Lee, who's going to talk us through the collection. He's a friend of mine on social media, but he's also been a local here for many years, who's probably an expert on Colnago
Lee's
himself.
been initially a customer and then a friend for a long time, and he is the encyclopedia Colnago.
Right.
He knows they did this, then they did that, then they did that. When you asked me if I met Colnago, well, I sort of met him. I shook his hand and he said hello, and Lee has met him, sat with him for an hour and talked about things. And he's got his own collection, and he's every time a new Colnago come out, he would come down with it with a new Campagnolo group set, or we'd get his group set for him and build it up for him.
Right.
You know, and so we've been his mechanic, but his knowledge is incredible.
Okay.
And when we decided,
so we'd have not to use that knowledge.
oh, absolutely.
So.
When I discussed with you the Colnagos, my immediate thought was, I actually don't know enough about them to sound like I know what I'm talking about. Whereas Lee knows, he'll point to all little things. Oh well, yes, well this thing here was that, and when they did that, they did this, and
brilliant.
You know.
Okay. Yeah. Right. Well, without further ado, let's kick off with the first bike and let Lee start talking us through them.
1980s Super, pretty much one of the iconic Colnagos to have. Obviously rode by the Del Tongo team. The purpose of this bike was to build sort of a tribute to what the team were riding at the time. So this, like I say, this is an early 80s bike, iconic Saronni Red colour. It's got the Super Record group set, which has been pantographed, which was pretty common for a lot of bikes in the 80s. One thing to note on this is it's also got some brand new Mavic SSC rims, which the team are riding. So, like I say, not necessarily totally period correct, but it's very much a nod to what the team are riding. So, in the evolution of Colnago, we sort of move from the Super to the Mexico. So, Mexico appeared in '84. As a result of Merckx's Our Record, and you see with this one it's very much a nod to Freddie Martin's, so it's the team blue that he would have used at the time, and again Super Record Panto parts, again very much a nod to the bike of that period. Obviously the teams used various frames, so you know, Mexico's Supers, etc. So you know, you can't always pin it down to one bike. So this is quite an interesting one. Probably one of the most discussed and one of the most controversial bikes within the range. So this is what's known as a Colnago Super Profile, or a profile. Some people call it a Mexico profile, but you know, within the circles, it's a Super Profile. Many people said that these were Nuovo Mexicos, etc., etc., but they're actually not. The difference between these and let's say, for example, a Mexico is the crimp tubes on the top and the bottom, and the rear stays. Now, with this bike, Saronni actually won the Worlds in 2002 on a Super Profile. Irrespective of all the arguments, he's even said himself it was a Super Profile. The reason this bike has a much later record group set in which is obviously gold, Colnago themselves have a bike in their collection which is one of Saroni's low profile bikes. It's a Super Profile frame and it's got the later C record in gold plated. So this was a bit of a nod to a bike that Colnago themselves have in their collection. Again, moving on through the DNA of the Colnago steel range, is what we have here. Is we have a Nuovo Mexico, and again, you know, this is an early Nuovo Mexico. I'm not going to go into huge details why, but there were certain things that changed in terms of forks and caps and certain detailing within the frame. But this is the earlier Nuovo Mexico frame. Again, obviously, it's been repainted to the colour that was the owner's requirements. So not necessarily totally period correct. But the one thing that this has got, it's got a really nice Campag 50th anniversary group set on it. Virtually new old stock. But you know, this was, you know, the pinnacle of the bike in the mid 80s. The key thing with this, which the owner's looking for, Graham's looking for, is he's missing the 50th anniversary skewers. So if anybody's got some new or very good condition skewers, please let him know, because you know he wants to get the bike as it should be. The previous bike was a Nuovo Mexico. We move on to what is another Nuovo Mexico. This is a slightly later bike. There's a few changes here that you'll notice if you look at closely. So forks, seat stay caps, things like that. So it's an evolution of the previous bike, pretty much the same as the previous model though. However, one thing with this bike, this is an ex Kwantum Decosol team frame. Couple of ways that you can identify ex-team frames. They'll have bespoke geometry, and typically they have certain things that you would expect on a race bike. So a race bike number boss and double bottle gauges. Now, not all team bikes have got frame numbers, but this one does have a corresponding frame number, which was confirmed by Colnago. It was an ex-team frame. Again, obviously it was found in a pretty bad state. It's been restored to a colour that was wanted, rather than it being restored back to full team spec. Hence the record components on it. So this is a bit of a hybrid for what. You know, it's a hybrid for what the owner wanted, rather than it being totally period correct to team issue. But yeah, you know, it just shows that these bikes are about. It's just knowing what they are and where they are. One interesting thing on this bike, which should be mentioned, is the Campagnolo Electra saddle. This is a classic example of when you shouldn't go on eBay after too many beers on a Friday night and start bidding on things. The price of this saddle was absolutely ridiculous, but it was new old stock, and in that green colour, you know, try and find another. So we've jumped from the sort of the supers, the Mexicos. You know, you can see the evolution that went through there. You can see Ernesto's thought pattern. They played around with crimp tubing. You know, there was quite a lot of evolution up until that point. The next jump was the introduction of the master frame. Now that came in 83, 84. And again, you will see many similarities to the second Nuovo Mexico that we've seen. So whilst this is an early model, and it's got quite an unusual paint scheme, you don't really see too many of these. It's not actually the first model that came out in 83, 84. That would have had external cable mounts on the top tube. This has obviously got an internal cable mount. Now, it's not known whether this was done specifically at factory, but as far as we can tell, the paint is original. So it may have been a special factory order, or it may have been a slightly later bike, maybe 85-ish, something like that. Again, another Master. This is a later bike, but it just shows you the where the models went in terms of the Master frames. This is a Master Olympic, pretty much the same specification as the current Master. So it's got the same forks, it's got the same tubing, it's got the same lugs, with the exception of the seat lug, but you know, this really was the pinnacle of 90s bikes, if you like. It's the Art Deco colour. It's a similar colour to what the Rabobank were riding at the time. You'll notice here it's got a race number boss. You could order additional braze-ons from the factory. The one thing that Colnago were very good at was, you know, you could pay for extra things. You could even go to the factory and they would measure you up and do bespoke frames. But you know, this clearly has been ordered, and it was a high spec bike in its time. Hence the additional paint, which was a premium, and things like race boss numbers. We spoke about the Masters. This really was regarded as the pinnacle of steel bikes through for Colnago. This is known as the Tecnos. It precedes the Master Olympic, although you know, both were available at the same time. I won't go into huge detail, but basically the tubing changes, and it's a much lighter bike. It's believed to be stiffer than the Master Olympic. It uses a few different lugs, etc., etc. But you know, you can Google the difference. The key thing about the Tecnos is it was designed really for the pro ranks. It was designed for the guys who were on the Mapei guys at the time. It was really sort of the evolution of the Master. The bike does have a weight limit, which is not a lot of people are aware of. I think it's 85 kilograms off the top of my head. But they were only in production for a couple of years. So the Tecnos, whilst it's the pinnacle of steel bikes, they're also relatively rare. A lot of people will, you know, watch old videos of teams racing, etc., etc. They think they're on Masters, and you know, if you're talking the late 90s, you know, a lot of them were on Tecnos bikes. Paint schemes were still the same. Another Master Olympic, the same as the orange Rabobank livery one that we've looked at. You know, it wouldn't be right to mention Colnago without mentioning Mapei. Now, this is again the Art Deco colour. Mapei used a very similar colour. It is the same frame ultimately as the orange bike, and it's the key thing about this is Colnago were going where Mapei were going. You'll also notice on this it's got the very nice Art Deco wheels. They were around 1996. You'll see them in the catalogues. I don't think they sold huge amounts of them, but you know, these are really nice set, hardly used. So you know, just really look well with the frame. The thing to say about the Master is, you know, it is one of those bikes that people still aspire to. They still make it. You know, the new bike is the new frame is very much the same as what we've looked at here in the blue Mapei and the orange Rabobank livery. So you know, really good frames, and yeah, they last forever. This is quite an interesting one because this is a 90 Super Pui. This was sold at the same time as the Master Olympics that we've been looking at. This was painted up in the Word Perfect team colours. Word Perfect were only around for a couple of seasons, so you know, the blue is very nice. Everybody, you know, goes for the big teams that we all know. It's pretty rare that you see Word Perfect bikes kicking around. Now, the other thing that this bike has is it has Suntour Super Pro group set. Obviously, Word Perfect were on that group set. Group set was regarded as one of the best at the time. You know, it had lots of technology that we now see, or that we believe that trickled through Shimano and the likes of that. But Suntour were well ahead of the game, and obviously, you know, at that time, some of the key pro teams were on Super Pro. Word Perfect, which morphed into Buckler, etc., etc. Obviously, as you go down the lines, you know, that team ultimately is now Jumbo Visma. So yeah, you know, whilst there's a timeline for Colnagos, there's also a timeline for the teams. We've spoke pretty much about the evolution of steel frames within Colnago. You know, the key thing to understand about all the frames, you know, you can see the DNA running through them. You can see the thought pattern of Ernesto, and you can see how he evolved bikes, whether it be stiffness, riding compliance, etc., etc. That's a big subject, but you know, you can see where it went right from the early supers, running through to the later supers that were crimped, the Mexicos which were crimped, Nuovo Mexicos, Masters, etc., etc. It wouldn't be right for us talking about Colnago without talking about the evolution of carbon frames. Now, it's well known that Colnago collaborated with Ferrari. That was really the beginning of the development of carbon frames. Everybody thinks that the C40 was the first sort of carbon frame, mass market frame that hit the shops and was pioneered by the teams, but you've got the Carbittubo. The first one that we've got here is in team colours. So this was typically the sort of team colours that the Alpha Lund team were on in the late 80s. It's got the double down tubes, and as you can see, it was built with this one's built with the Shimano Dura Ace at the time. Relatively quite a rare bike, this one, or certainly the frame's relatively rare. There's lots of discussion about these bikes. Yes, they were built by Alan. Graham has spoke about his connection with Alan frames in previous videos. So, you know, if you compare the Alan frame to this, you can see, you know, they are basically the same frame. Lugs are slightly different. Lugs are branded Colnago. One of the key things about the Colnagos is when you look at the carbon tubes themselves, they are a different weave to the Allen frame, so they're slightly different, but it's believed that the tubes for the Colnago bikes came from an Italian source, which later went on to work with Colnago building the C40. That's something that we maybe need to confirm a bit further. Another Carbittubo, same era, so you're talking 88, 89 onwards. This one in Ariostea team colours. So obviously, you know, they're again very well known pro team at the time. The likes of Bjarne Riis rode for those, amongst others. The difference with this tube is a single down tube. So the previous one, you know, a lot of people do see the double down tubes. They did double down tubes in both an aluminium and a carbon. Aluminium predating the carbon, but the single down tubes are a bit more, a bit harder to find. You don't really see too many of them. And obviously in Ariostea team colours, even more difficult to find these days. And I think, you know, those two bikes are definitely, you know, ones for the collectors. You do struggle to find them. So this is Colnago Extreme. Now the Colnago Extreme C came to being in 2006. At that point, Rabobank were riding Colnagos, and Michael Rasmussen requested a climbing bike, so they developed the Extreme C, which was a prototype in 2006. From 2006, the team liked the bikes that much, the rest of the team wanted Extreme Cs, so they launched them to the general public. They launched two frames. There was an Extreme C and Extreme Power. The Extreme Power was aimed more at the heavier, more powerful sprinters. But the Extreme C was really the bike that the team were on at the time. Now this frame is an ex-team frame. So this is a 2008 frame. It was ridden at the Tour de France and it's built back to exactly team spec. So there's a few things on this bike that were not team. So the group set's not team. Pretty much everything else. But the frame is as it would have been. You know, having spoken to a few ex-team riders at that point and said, you know, when you were riding, what was your favourite bike? you know, all of them have come back and said the Extreme C. And even today, if you pick up this bike, it's extremely light. It's very, very stiff. You know, an absolute thoroughbred amongst Colnago bikes. Obviously, this is 2008. Lots of things have moved on since. You know, we've had we're up to date where we are today with the Colnago C64, which has just been superseded by the C68. There's lots of discussion on the forums about the new bikes, about where they're going. Really, this was to give a bit of a snapshot about. You know, from the 80s upwards. There's lots of bikes we haven't included. The collection is super extensive, and yes, you know, at some point we may revisit some of the bikes that have not been shown today.
Well, Graham, you've got some absolute beautiful bikes there, and a huge thanks to Lee for talking us through that collection. Thanks again. I'm sure we're going to be revisiting. We've got plenty to be talking about still.
More,
yeah. So with Italian bikes and
the Vitus mountain bike, I forgot to put in the last video.
Yeah, there is actually a couple of mountain bikes in the collection. It's not just Vitus either. So yeah, one to look out for. So thanks so much for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe. And until next time, bye for now.
Right. I haven't really bought any bikes for the last 2 or 3 years because I ran out of money. If anyone wants to lend me some money, that'll be great, you know, or they may want to make me a ridiculous offer on any of the bikes. Don't put that in.
No.